In this episode of Paving the Funnel, we talked to Jeff McIntyre about building a successful personalization program. Jeff's the founder of Bucket Studio, a boutique agency that offers connected experience, marketing automation, and content operations solutions.
All right, Jeff, well, it's really lovely to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us for Pave the Funnel.
Of course.
I want to just kick it off with a broad question. What are the key ingredients to a highly effective personalization program?
Well, I thought you would never ask, Heather. So when you get your data game together and it's all humming in sort of perfect, uniform precision, people want to start to leverage that data, make it actionable in different ways. One of those ways is with personalization. And what I found, and my partner Colin Egan has found in developing progressive personalization, is if you think about basically automating or customizing user flows down at the snack and meal level, you're going to find a way to just step into this iteratively and not have to overthink, oh, we have to personalize all the things, all the content, all the audience segments at once.
So yeah, let's take a step back and Jeff, can you just outline for me, what does a personalization program even really mean or entail?
It's a great question. Personalization programs are an outgrowth of an A/B testing program or any sort of hypothesis-driven growth experiments that you may be running inside your organization. A personalization program is when you've brought those activities to a threshold where you are running automations and personalizations that are always on. You've productionalized a lot of tests, and you may be working with more sophisticated software than you were previously with your testing.
And what's the ultimate end goal of personalization? Like, why would an e-commerce or a direct-to-consumer brand care about personalization?
There's two of very key benefits, and it's really critical that you not ignore one for the other, which I do see quite often. Number one, there's business benefit, and that is obvious. Organizations want to learn more about their users. They want to have a sense of user centricity or even customer intimacy, it's sometimes called, learn much more readily how their product is serving customer needs. And then from the other end of the table, end user benefit. And that really comes down to the user experience and taking, say, an 8-tap process, making it a 3-tap process, or really suggesting next steps, providing choice reduction. A lot of this is like old stuff from the beginnings of designing for online experiences, but personalization makes it a lot easier and actionable to take these steps to provide users with a lot less friction in solving the jobs that they're trying to accomplish when they visit your site or use your product.
How do you think about the actual execution here as opposed to the bigger kind of paradigm of progressive personalization?
Yeah, I think, what happens in these programs is that you sort of lift the curtain, and you now have a chance to re-examine every single interaction on your site and start to think about it almost in this fourth dimension where it's like, how would we, create the store for this user as opposed to that user? There's an old Jeff Bezos line about, if I have 14.5 million users, there should be 14.5 million shops, not one shop with Amazon. And that is, again, part of the allure of personalization, is that you can take all of these possible choices, reduce them down to something that's close to a one-to-one fit for a user. And what I've found is that when organizations are starting to think about this, it's very overwhelming. So one of the things we bring them back to is, let's look at the actual content you've got on these screens that you consider so critical and start to clean them up. And actually, if we're thinking about very discrete audiences and we already know that these messages aren't as meaningful to that audience, let's reduce those calls to action. Let's just take them away. Let's let white space reign. And so I've got one client where we did an exercise just like this, where we A/B tested a series of different tiers of registration to their membership services organization. We found one that performed really well. And then we recessed the other options. They're still available, but it was just a design change and a simplification of the user interface. And they found a level of lift from that that is putting $800,000 into their annualized lifetime value of their experience. And that's just design and sort of, first principles thinking. You go from that sort of perspective, and then you start to think about these actual screens. In e-commerce, you have lots of examples like this where, say, if a form field requires a phone number, but it doesn't provide any microcopy that explains what we do with that phone number, or why we need it. We need it for logistics and delivery by a courier, for example. The Baymard Institute, which studies e-commerce sites and their usability, found that over, I think it was 50%, 56% of the sites that they surveyed in e-commerce did not provide any sort of hover or help context or anything. And therefore, the level of abandonment that that these organizations see sometimes is triggered by not feeling comfortable giving a phone number. It's little things like that that are just sort of like 101 usability principles, and we're coming back to a lot of those as we look at personalizing for explicit audiences and rethinking just what we're asking for from users in a very granular way.
When you launch a personalization program or you're diving into this kind of work with a new client, what are you looking for right off the bat? How are you auditing the setup that they have in place, the data they have in
Yeah.
place, to understand where to start?
Well, one of the things that's really important to me is to understand what their experience of data management is and how they think about testing and test and learn sort of methodologies. A lot of organizations that are ready to optimize their content have been doing some kind of conversion rate optimization already in the past. They may have resourced that externally, or they may have an in-house testing team or just a smaller complement of staff doing that. And there's a really important inflection moment that happens when you start thinking about personalization, which is you're not necessarily training for an immediate lift or an immediate conversion. And CRO is really great, but it is highly tactical. You're looking more at lifetime value. How can we create really recurring sort of habits for users that are really, high utility, delightful, surprising, serendipitous? That's the kind of thing you can get with personalization over time, because a good personalization program is going to be catering and super serving certain segments and cohorts that are of high interest to the business, or where we see really strong signals about what those users are trying to achieve that they wouldn't achieve as easily before we personalized the content.
What are the most common design mistakes that you see e-commerce brands making?
Sometimes it's a matter of just fixating on particulars and ignoring the overall flow of pages or screens. So when a user is trying to achieve something, they're trying to complete a task, oftentimes we'll break that task out into multiple screens. Classically, filling out registration for an e-commerce site is done over multiple screens. Now, we've learned a lot in 20 years of the web about how to do this. But one of the things that I see oftentimes with organizations that are beginning to personalize is they'll look at very discrete, static elements. They'll look to make some change to that, and they will, in some way, unintentionally, not be taking full understanding of the flow of what's going on here. And sometimes that can cause trouble. And I really like for organizations to be thinking in terms of user flows rather than just, here's a page, can we make it more effective? And because I think when people start from the perspective of our users are trying to do something here, how can we help channel more of that traffic more virtuously, so they're getting more benefit and therefore our brand is getting more benefit, is really the way to go. And it's a place where designers can really do great work because they're able to think and supply you wireframes and comps and prototypes that will help take the best advantage of the personalization technology without overthinking it or just fixating on particular colors or nomenclature of little elements on a page. And I think that's where you really get a lot of benefit, is once you bring design into the equation. And the most successful personalization initiatives do put design at the center of their practice.
So when we're thinking about progressive personalization, clearly there is an emphasis on prioritizing. And I'm curious how you think about identifying the key cohorts that an e-commerce brand should be building their prioritization for.
Absolutely. I think what you need is a sort of first step is a customer journey map. Customer journey maps tend to be conducted in different levels of detail. And what you want to do is take things that, sometimes are called empathy maps, and there's other ways of sort of packaging these, but you want to start to marry them to the data that you've got in your product analytics to really understand performance of different segments or different cohorts. So you may have already conducted persona work. You may have already conducted a customer journey map. This may ask you to go into a deeper level of detail so you can start to see what segments or cohorts you're going to emphasize and maybe which ones you're going to de-emphasize depending on if you're optimizing for things like loyalty and retention, or you're optimizing for things like average order value and trying to make certain quotas on a weekly basis. There's a sort of slide between tactical and the strategic that I think is quite important to be aware of. And there's no truly right answer, but I think what wins in the end is lifetime value and creating an experience that's predictable and reliable and really performant for users so that they get a really clean expectation of what they're going to get when they're on your site.
You've enlightened us. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Anytime.